Forget everything you think you know about missing persons cases. The disappearance of Ranger Thomas Miller wasn't an accident. It was an erasure. A meticulous, seasoned expert of the park, Miller simply didn't come back from his July 12, 1988 patrol. The only tangible evidence left behind is his patrol log, a document that holds the chilling truth of his final moments and the slow, creeping descent into a madness triggered by a bizarre pulsing thrum from the cliffs near Leaning Tower. The initial patrol was routine. Miller's log from that night is filled with the kind of mundane observations you'd expect. Trail conditions, wildlife sightings, the names of campers he'd checked in on. He noted a few deer, a family of raccoons rustling near a campsite, and a perfectly clear night, no red flags. The evening was uneventful. He'd even brewed himself a pot of coffee before bedding down. Everything was normal. The first unsettling detail appeared as a single, almost dismissed line in his log. Faint humming, high frequency. Origin unknown. Likely some kind of survey equipment. That was it. He probably thought nothing of it. Just another oddity in the wilderness. He went to sleep, and the park was quiet. But the next day was different. Ranger Miller failed to check in at the scheduled 0600 roll call. A search and rescue team was immediately deployed. They found his patrol vehicle, undisturbed and locked at the trailhead. This was odd, as Miller was known for leaving his vehicle unlocked in case of an emergency access need. But the real dread set in when they located his campsite. It was approximately 1.5 miles from the trailhead. His tent was packed, his sleeping bag rolled. He had clearly planned to depart at first light. His personal gear wallet, keys, a spare jacket were left neatly stacked by a large pine tree. This was highly unusual for Miller, who was methodical about his gear. It was as if he had prepared to leave, but then, for some reason, had to abandon his most essential items in a rush. The most unsettling discovery was his patrol log, found lying open on a flat rock. The final entries, written in his precise hand, showed a terrifying shift in his mental state. The calm, factual tone had completely unraveled. The humming had returned. His log entry from that night described it as not a drone. It was a lower frequency now, almost a vibration that he could feel in his teeth. It wasn't a static sound. It was pulsing like a heartbeat, but wrong. It was a rhythmic thrumming that made the air feel heavy and thick with an unspoken presence. He wrote that he had packed his tent, but his hands were shaking so bad he could barely roll his sleeping bag. He wasn't going to wait for first light. This was not right. It was no longer a sound. It was a presence. His final entries are a descent into sheer psychological horror. He wrote that he thought it was mimicking him. He saw his own shadow move before he did. His breath was fogging, but the air was still warm. "I am not cold," he scribbled repeatedly. "I am not cold. It has found me. It knows my path." Then came the part that sent a chill through every search and rescue veteran who read the file. Miller wrote that the trees were silent. There was no wind. The hum was gone, leaving only whispers. It is inside the trees. All of them. They are waiting. He claimed he could see the outline of something in the fog, but there was no fog. "They say not to leave the path," his final entry read. But that's what it wanted. They wanted me to run, and I am running. The final line was scrawled with a heavy, frantic pressure, the pen almost tearing the paper. Beside the log, a single deep impression of a boot print was found. It belonged to Ranger Miller, but it was facing the wrong direction away from the trail and toward the dense, uncharted forest beyond the Leaning Tower. Despite a massive 2-week search operation involving helicopters, K-9 units, and dozens of trained volunteers, no further trace of Ranger Miller was ever found. No discarded gear, no footprints, no clothing. It was as if he had simply been swallowed whole. Officially, the case remains a non-fatal missing person. with the log entries considered a psychological response to stress and isolation. However, a subsequent unauthorized review of the case noted an interesting detail. The humming sound described in Ranger Miller Oslog was also mentioned in a separate incident involving two campers who had to be rescued from the same area after suffering a severe panic attack. They too had described an unnatural pulsing sound coming from the stones themselves. One of the campers, after a lengthy hospitalization, claimed that the sound was a chorus of silent voices, a memory he couldn't shake. The case of Ranger Miller is still active, but the file is cold. There are no new leads. The mystery of what he saw, or what found him, continues to hang over the quiet trails of Yosemite. The park rangers who work there now have an unofficial, unwritten rule: never, ever go on a solo overnight patrol near Leaning Tower. In October of 2016, Yosemite National Park recorded one of its strangest unresolved disappearances. The victim was 27-year-old Mia Alvarez, a visitor from San Jose, California. She had come to the park with two friends, 28-year-old Caleb Ruiz and 29-year-old Jordan Blake. Their plan was simple: a short afternoon hike from Curry Village into the southeastern backcountry, following an unmaintained trail that no longer appeared on most modern maps. According to park records, they set out just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Weather conditions were calm and clear. The group was experienced enough to handle the terrain, though none of them were professional hikers. At 2:40 p.m., Caleb texted his sister a photograph from the trail. It showed the three of them smiling, with tall pines in the background. At 3:05, Jordan posted a short video clip to Instagram. The clip is now archived, but investigators later noted that the audio was distorted in a way consistent with magnetic interference. From there, the timeline begins to fragment. By 5:30, Caleb's GPS began showing erratic readings. Coordinates jumped miles at a time, and the digital compass spun without stopping. At 6:17 p.m., somewhere along a ridge above the Merced River Canyon, Mia Alvarez was last seen by her companions. The official record states that she vanished suddenly from the group. 1 second she was walking directly behind them, and the next she was gone. There were no footsteps leading away, no broken branches, no sign of an animal attack. In his statement given a week later, survivor Caleb Ruiz described the forest as unnaturally silent. He said, "It wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. Like the whole place was holding its breath. You ever hear an echo before you speak? That's what it was like. We shouted her name, but the echo came back too fast, like it was waiting for us. And then she was just gone. I saw something move between the trees, something tall. It bent the air around it, like heat coming off asphalt. Then I heard it. Kids laughing, out there, miles from anywhere." Search and rescue was launched immediately. Over 60 personnel combed the forest with dogs, helicopters, and thermal imaging equipment. The dogs refused to enter certain sections of the woods. Handlers described them as cowering, ears back, whining. One dog bolted back toward the road and would not continue. Thermal imaging revealed multiple cold zones, unnaturally low readings in concentrated areas. But when ground teams entered those locations, they reported nothing unusual except a heavy metallic smell. Investigators discovered an abandoned ranger cabin deep within the search zone. The structure was collapsing, clearly unused for decades. Yet one wall bore long, vertical gouges running from ceiling to floor. No tool matched them. The claw marks were weathered, but old wood around them was warped, as if under pressure. Inside the cabin, searchers found an old radio, disconnected from power. As they entered, it clicked on by itself. Static filled the air, and through the static, several rescuers reported hearing faint children's laughter. One volunteer swore the static whispered her own name. Despite weeks of effort, not a single trace of Mia Alvarez was recovered. Her clothing, her phone, her backpack all gone. It was as though she had been lifted out of existence. Then came the second mystery. On the third day of searching, Jordan Blake, her friend and hiking companion, also disappeared. He had been assisting with ground teams when he reportedly separated to check a nearby clearing. He never returned. His footprints stopped in soft earth, leading nowhere. Investigators recovered his earlier Instagram video. When audio specialists enhanced the clip, they reported hearing a faint, layered voice beneath the distortion. The voice repeated the name, Mia, in a drawn-out, distorted cadence. The final and only surviving member of the group, Caleb, was never charged with wrongdoing. His trauma was judged authentic. But he has refused interviews since that year. Neighbors describe him as withdrawn. They claim he wakes screaming. And more than once, people living nearby have reported hearing a woman's voice, calling his name from the woods behind his home. The official case file remains open. No human remains. No confirmed sightings. Just another unexplained disappearance in Yosemite National Park. And if you ask rangers off the record, some will admit, Yosemite has more of these vanishings than almost anywhere else in America. September 22nd, 2019. Yosemite National Park recorded another disappearance that would confound investigators for months, leaving more questions than answers. The missing individual was Daniel Whitaker, 34, a school teacher from Sacramento, California. Whitaker was an experienced hiker, known to explore even the park's remote regions. On that Sunday morning, he checked into the park alone, officially filing a short 3-day plan across the Tenaya Canyon backcountry, an area some rangers quietly call the Bermuda Triangle of Yosemite. Witnesses saw him at the trailhead just before 10 a.m., carrying a modern hiking pack, wearing appropriate gear, and in good spirits. His movements were deliberate, his planning meticulous. No one suspected what would unfold. By early afternoon, Whitaker texted a colleague a photo of the canyon walls, showing a glimmer of sunlight cutting through tall pines. Later that day, another hiker reported seeing him along a ridge, waving and smiling. That would be the last confirmed sighting. Search operations began the following morning, prompted by his missed check-in with family. Initially, authorities assumed a simple mishap, an injured hiker needing help. What they found, however, defied explanation. Search dogs initially tracked Whitaker's scent through dense pine and granite. But halfway into the trail, they stopped at a clearing where the soil was soft and untouched. The dogs refused to advance. Handlers reported unusual behavior, whining, growling at nothing visible, and a reluctance to re-enter the area even on leash. Rangers described it as uneasy, almost fearful. Thermal imaging over the same section revealed anomalies. Several areas registered intense cold, inconsistent with ambient temperatures or shade patterns. Compasses spun erratically. Radios emitted static and occasional low-frequency hums. One field operative noted, the canyon itself felt wrong. The air was thick, like static electricity after a storm, but there was no storm. On the third day, rescuers found Whitaker's backpack on a flat rock. Everything was intact: food, water, first aid kit. His map, however, was folded to reveal an abandoned miner's trail, no longer on official park maps. Nearby, his camera lay on the ground. Photographs recovered from the memory card revealed a series of normal hiking images, until the final one. A blurred frame of forest canopy at dusk, with an indistinct tall humanoid shape between two trees. Analysts could not match it to human proportions. Off the record, one senior ranger described the figure as something tall, too thin, bending the air around it. Complicating matters, teams discovered a half-collapsed cabin, unmarked on modern maps. Inside were scraps of century-old paper diary entries from miners documenting strange singing, lights moving in the trees, whispers calling names in the night. One entry read, "I hear my name called, though no one is there. Something tall walks at the edge of the firelight. If I leave, I will not come back." The cabin's proximity to Whitaker's last known location was under half a mile. On day 6, a volunteer searcher claimed to hear a man's voice shouting for help from the canyon. The voice echoed across the granite walls, distorted and moving, never stationary. Audio devices recorded the phenomenon, revealing overlapping frequencies, almost as if two entities were speaking simultaneously. Field logs include multiple oddities: GPS devices resetting to default coordinates, watches stopping, hikers reporting feeling watched or being followed by invisible presences. One rescue team noted, "We were certain someone was walking behind us, but the forest was empty. Not a leaf stirred." Local accounts add another layer of unease. A few residents living near Tenaya Canyon described faint singing in the distance on cold nights. Sometimes children's voices, sometimes a man crying for help. One older woman recounted her father warning, "If you go past the canyon's edge after sunset, the shadows will follow you, and sometimes they don't let you return." Investigators reviewed dozens of similar cases in the park's history. Yosemite has a higher than average incidence of hikers disappearing without a trace. Patterns include sudden vanishings near ridges, failure of electronics, reports of unusual sounds or lights, and locations that seem to resist tracking. Despite exhaustive searches, no remains were recovered. Not a boot, not a fragment of clothing, nothing. The park officially listed Whitaker as missing, presumed lost to accident. Yet rangers on record can oft admit privately, "We don't believe it was an accident." Follow-up investigations tried mapping electromagnetic anomalies, interviewing long-term employees, and even placing motion cameras in Tenaya Canyon. Footage occasionally caught inexplicable shadows, blurs, or light distortions. Audio occasionally captured faint voices, whispers, singing, or calling of names. Experts analyzing recordings confirmed they were not normal echoes, but could not explain their origin. Daniel Whitaker's disappearance remains an open case. To this day, hikers report eerie sounds, lights moving in the trees, and feelings of being watched. Locals warn against camping in Tenaya Canyon after dark. They say that if you hear a man crying for help, you should not approach. It is not always a living person. Yosemite National Park has been the scene of countless disappearances over decades. Some say the canyon itself is a gateway, or that something ancient hides within the forests, taking those who wander too far. The files remain open, the canyon continues to wait, and the echoes of Daniel Whitaker's last hike linger in the wind. Some people just get lost in the wild. But what happened to Dr. Elias Vance wasn't a case of getting lost. It was a vanishing. On July 28, 1993, a brilliant scientist was swallowed by Tenaya Lake, leaving behind a chilling truth in his final notes. This wasn't a simple hiker getting confused. It was the breakdown of a man of science, a psychological fall that started with strange static on his radio and a silent, unspeakable presence that followed him. People who worked with him remember a very careful man, but his last notes read like the words of a ghost, telling of something that makes no sense. Vance's first notes were, as always, very careful. He was listing a rare type of mountain wildflowers and watching how they grew. He wrote that the weather was strangely quiet, no wind, no rustling leaves, just a heavy silence. His patrol log, found neatly on a small table in his tent, shows the first weird event happened at 10:47 p.m. Static on the radio, just white noise for 15 minutes. No one calling, no talking. Then for a second, a weird sound. Not a person. A low, repeated click, like a code, followed by a sound that felt like a wet whisper from a throat. It wasn't on the normal channels. It was inside the static. His notes became more and more panicked after that. He wrote about a constant feeling of being watched, something he had never felt in his 30 years in the wild. He first thought it was just nerves from the radio incident, but the bad feeling got stronger. He started hearing faint whispers like the ones from the radio, but now they were coming from the shadows of the tall pine trees around his camp. He wrote that it wasn't a whisper of words, but of something much creepier, a wet, clicking sound, like a bug trying to talk. The sound was so strange and scary, he just stood in the middle of his camp, listening, trying to find where it was coming from, even as a deep, cold fear took over. He noted that at 2:15 a.m., he found small, weird patches of frost on the inside of his tent, even though the night was warm. He wrote, "The air is humid. I can't see my breath. But the frost, it's making perfect six-sided shapes, like something is trying to make a drawing on the tent." He tried to rub them off, but they came right back. The quiet that followed was even more terrifying than the whispers. The final notes describe a terrible step up. The whispers became a loud group, not from the trees, but from inside the tent with him. He wrote that his flashlight was dying, blinking on and off by itself, but only when he pointed it at the thick trees. He wrote about seeing tiny, quick movements at the edge of his vision, things with many legs, too small to see what they were, that moved in a way that wasn't possible, changing shape and blurring like a heat wave. "They are not animals," he scribbled. "They are the whispers made real. They want me to look at them, to get it." His final note, written with a shaky hand at 3:04 a.m, was a single strange line. "The silence has teeth. They want the warmth. I am going to the water." When the search team found his camp the next morning, everything was neat and in its place. His personal things, his keys, wallet, and a map were stacked neatly on the table. The only things missing were Dr. Vance himself and one sealed bag that was meant to hold a rare wildflower he had picked. The search for Dr. Vance found nothing. They found no footprints leaving the camp, no signs of a fight, nothing. The trail just ended. The case was officially closed as a missing person, and his journal was seen as a final, desperate story from a man who had a bad mental breakdown. But a park ranger from the first search team later wrote an unofficial report. While she was looking along the shore of Tenaya Lake, she found one single footprint in the wet sand by the water's edge. It was Dr. Vance's boot print, but it was facing away from the water, as if he was pulled backward. His heels had dragged a shallow line in the sand before he just disappeared. The only other thing she saw was a single clear substance in the water, a shimmering, web-like shape that vanished in seconds. The official file on Dr. Elias Vance is still open, but the rangers who patrol near Tenaya Lake have a secret, scary understanding. When the air is still and the sound of the mountains goes quiet, it's best to stay away from the water. In August of 2021, Yosemite National Park recorded another disappearance that continues to baffle investigators. The missing person was Lila Morgan, 25, an amateur photographer from Los Angeles. She entered the park alone to reach Clouds Rest Overlook before sunset and capture the canyon in golden light. Lila was known for exploring remote, unmaintained trails, seeking vistas few had photographed. She carried a full pack, a high-end camera, and adequate water and supplies for a 2-day hike. Witnesses last saw her at approximately 9:45 a.m. at the Tenaya Lake Trail Junction. She waved to a passing hiker, smiled, and continued along a narrow path that winds into near-impassable granite cliffs. By noon, she sent a text to a friend, "Almost there. Views will be incredible. Can't wait to show you." That would be her last communication. By late afternoon, she failed to check in. Concerned, family contacted park rangers, triggering a search operation. Initial reconnaissance teams approached the area cautiously. The trail is notorious for sudden drop-offs and shifting granite scree, but nothing in these conditions explained what would soon unfold. Search dogs were brought to the ridge at 2:17 p.m. They picked up Lila's scent easily at first, tracking it for nearly a mile. Suddenly, they stopped at a clearing where the ground appeared disturbed, but showed no footprints, no scuff marks, nothing that would indicate a person's passage. Handlers described the dogs as agitated, growling at the empty forest, hair raised, ears flat. They refused to continue, even when pulled on leash. One handler whispered, "They knew something was there, and we didn't." By 3:04 p.m., a team using handheld GPS devices reported irregular readings. Coordinates jumped several hundred meters at random intervals. Compasses spun uncontrollably. Radios emitted bursts of static, punctuated by low, indistinct whispers. Several rescuers reported hearing what sounded like faint laughter, far too close to be distant hikers. At 4:16 p.m., one team discovered Lila's camera lying atop a flat granite slab near the edge of the ridge. The SD card was intact. Images showed normal landscapes, trees, granite cliffs, sunlight filtering through the canopy, but then the final sequence. Distorted shadows moving between trees, lights that did not correspond to the sun, and one image showing a tall, thin humanoid shape partially obscured by the forest. Analysts could not identify any known creature matching the proportions. The figure appeared to bend the air around it, as if reality itself warped in its presence. By 5:12 p.m., the first false trail appeared. A section of footprints, freshly imprinted, seemingly leading toward the overlook, vanished after 50 feet. Every time a search team followed, the trail would loop back to the clearing where the dogs had stopped. Radios picked up faint whispers, repeating the name Lila in a distorted cadence. One ranger noted, "It was like the forest itself was mocking us." During the night, teams reported anomalous thermal readings. Heat signatures appeared and disappeared unpredictably. Watches and GPS units stopped working. The temperature dropped sharply in isolated areas, despite warm ambient conditions. Several rescuers described a feeling of being watched, shadows moving in peripheral vision, and faint, childlike laughter echoing from unseen directions. On the second day, teams explored a dilapidated cabin marked on century-old maps. The roof was collapsed, walls leaning, yet inside were strange carvings. Distorted human figures intertwined with tree branches. A torn journal page from a miner dated 1912 read, "The forest remembers. It waits. Names echo and deceive. Those who wander too far are claimed." At 11:47 a.m., one ranger team recorded audio of faint voices. When enhanced, the audio revealed multiple overlapping frequencies, whispering indistinct words. Several rescuers reported hearing Lila's voice calling for help, but in a tone that was slow, deliberate, and hollow. By the third day, the search intensified. Helicopters scanned ridges. Drones were deployed in areas inaccessible by foot. Thermal cameras picked up intermittent anomalies, yet ground teams could not locate any corresponding physical evidence. Footprints appeared and vanished on granite surfaces. Clothing sometimes found and then inexplicably missing. Personal items seemingly placed deliberately, but without explanation. Local residents contributed information. A retired park ranger recalled, "Tenaya Canyon has always been strange. People disappear there. Electronics fail. Shadows move. Sometimes you hear crying, but when you reach out, nothing's there. The forest, it's alive in ways we don't understand." Another witness, a hiker passing through the canyon a week later, reported, "I saw a figure standing on a ridge. It didn't move like a human. Its arms were too long, and it seemed stretched. I called out. It vanished." By day 6, no trace of Lila Morgan had been found. SAR teams, including canine units, thermal imaging specialists, and drone operators, concluded that the disappearance could not be explained by accident, animal attack, or human interference. The official report listed her as missing, presumed lost. However, internal notes state, nothing about this case follows natural laws. The forest itself resists our presence, our technology, our search. To this day, hikers and campers near Clouds Rest Overlook report sudden equipment failures, faint laughter, shadows that appear to move against wind patterns, and cold spots where the air feels unnaturally heavy. GPS devices fail without reason. Radios emit static interspersed with whispering voices. Some claim to hear a woman's voice calling their name, repeating it in distorted cadence. The disappearance of Lila Morgan remains open, a case file in Yosemite's archives, a reminder that the forest is not always benign. It is patient, it watches, and occasionally it takes those who wander too far from the path, leaving behind only whispers, shadows, and questions that may never be answered.